boys and girls. Thank you for coming back to Grandma Reads. We're once again reading from Little House, and we're reading some of the Christmas stories, and we are on chapter number 5. Mr. Edwards meets Santa Claus. On Christmas morning, Laura opened her eyes. She heard Jack growl, and then the door rattled. "Ingalls, Ingalls," someone said. Pa opened the door. "Great fish hooks, Edwards!" he cried. "Come in!" Laura looked toward the fireplace and saw the stockings hanging limply. She shut her eyes again. She heard Pa piling wood on the fire. Then she heard Mr. Edwards say he had carried his clothes on his head when he swam across the creek. "It was too big a risk, Edwards," Pa said. "We're glad you're here, but that was too big a risk for a Christmas dinner." "Your little ones had to have a Christmas," Mr. Edwards replied. "No creek could stop me after I met up with Santa Claus." Laura sat straight up in bed. "You saw Santa Claus?" she shouted. "I sure did," Mr. Edwards said. "Where? When? What did he look like? What did he say? Did he really give you something for us?" Mara and Laurie cried at the same time. Wait a minute," Mr. Edwards laughed. Ma said she would put the presents in the stockings, as Santa Claus had intended. She said the girls mustn't look. Mr. Edwards came and sat on the floor by their bed. He answered every question they asked. Laura and Mary tried not to look at what Ma was doing. Mr. Edwards told them how he was walking through town when all of a sudden he saw Santa Claus coming down the street. "In the daytime?" Laura asked. She didn't think anyone could see Santa Claus in the daytime. "No," Mr. Edwards said. "It was night. The first thing Santa Claus said was, 'Hello, Edwards.'" "Did he know you?" Mary asked. "How did you know he was really Santa Claus?" Laura asked. Mr. Edwards said that Santa Claus knew everybody, and he knew Santa at once by his whiskers. Santa Claus had the longest, thickest, whitest set of whiskers west of the Mississippi. "Edwards," Santa Claus said, "I understand you're living down by that roaring creek. Do you happen to know 2 little girls named Mary and Laura down there?" "I surely do know them," Mr. Edwards replied. "It rests heavy on my mind," said Santa Claus. "They are both of them such sweet, pretty, good little things, and I know they are expecting me. I surely do hate to disappoint 2 good little girls like them. But with the water up the way it is, I can't make it across that creek." Santa Claus tugged on his whiskers and looked at Mr. Edwards with a twinkle in his eye. "Edwards," he said, "you look like you could make it across that creek. Would you do me a favor and take Laura and Mary their gifts this one time?" "I'll do that, and with pleasure," Mr. Edwards told him. Then Santa Claus and Mr. Edwards stepped across the street to the hitching post, where Santa's pack mule was tied. "Didn't he have his reindeer?" Laura asked. "You know, he couldn't," Mary said. "There isn't any snow." "Exactly," said Mr. Edwards. "Santa Claus travels with a pack mule in the Southwest." Santa Claus opened the pack and took out the presents for Mary and Laura. But Mary asked, "Then what did he do?" Santa Claus shook hands with Mr. Edwards and swung up on his fine bay horse. He tucked his long white whiskers under his bandana and said, "So long, Edwards." Then Santa Claus rode away on the Fort Dodge Trail, whistling and leading his pack mule behind him. Laura and Mary were silent, thinking of that. Then Ma said, "You may look now, girls." Laura saw that something was shining bright in the top of her stocking. She squealed and jumped out of bed. So did Mary, but Laura beat her to the fireplace. The shining thing was a glittering new tin cup. Mary had one exactly like it. Now they had tin cups of their very own. Laura jumped up and down and shouted and laughed. Mary stood still and looked with shining eyes at her own tin cup. They plunged their hands into the stockings again. Out came 2 long sticks of candy. It was peppermint candy, striped red and white. They looked and looked at the beautiful candy. Laura licked her stick just 1 lick, but Mary was not so greedy. She didn't take even 1 lick. And the stockings weren't empty yet. Mary and Laura reached in and pulled out 2 small packages. Inside each package was a little heart-shaped cake. The tops of the little cakes were sprinkled with white sugar. The sparkling grains looked like tiny drifts of snow. The cakes were too pretty to eat. Mary and Laura just looked at them. But at last Laura turned hers over. She nibbled a tiny nibble from underneath, where it wouldn't show. The inside of the little cake was white, too. Laura and Mary didn't think to look in their stockings again. The cups and the candy and the cakes were almost too much. They were too happy to speak. But then Ma asked if they were sure their stockings were empty. Laura and Mary reached inside one more time. In the very toe of each stocking was a shiny, bright, new penny. Now they each had a penny of their very own, a cup and a cake and a stick of candy and a penny. There never had been such a Christmas. Laura and Mary were so happy they forgot about Mr. Edwards. They even forgot about Santa Claus. In a minute they would have remembered, but before they did, Ma said gently, "Aren't you going to thank Mr. Edwards?" "Oh, thank you, Mr. Edwards, thank you," Laura and Mary said, and they meant it with all their hearts. Then Mr. Edwards stuck his hands into his pockets and took out 9 sweet potatoes. He brought them all the way from town. He thought Pa and Ma might like sweet potatoes with the Christmas turkey. Now for Christmas dinner, there was the big, juicy roasted turkey, there were the soft, buttery sweet potatoes, and there was a fresh loaf of warm bread. After all that, there were dried blackberries and more little cakes. But these little cakes were made with brown sugar. They did not have white sugar sprinkled over their tops. After dinner, Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards sat by the fire and talked. Mary and Laura looked at their beautiful cakes and played with their pennies and drank water out of their new tin cups. Little by little, they licked their sticks of candy. That was a happy Christmas. And thank you for joining me. And if you'll come back tomorrow, we will read chapter number 6.